Welcome to the Boxing Source Midweek Report, where we tackle the latest topics in the sport of boxing here up to this point every single Wednesday. Time to start the show. Yo, mic check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Trying to get a few things going. What's going on, everybody? What's happening with you? No, I'm not. Doing a imitation El Haj Malik El Shabazz here. This is JR, of course, here from the Bison Source, here with the Midweek Report, checking in for October 8th, 2025. And, you'll just have a few things here that we're going to be talking about in this particular episode of the Midweek Report. I know we have a fight card that's coming up in Philadelphia here. I was going to do like a quick view of this fight card. I've had a couple of things that have been going on in reference to this fight card, have talked about it numerous times over the past couple of weeks here, but it looks like, we're having a couple of updates here and there for it. I'm going to do a brief rundown of the fight card at Wells Fargo Center in Philadelphia, and then also get into the hot topics here for, the week, and a couple of things as far as like potential news that may be dropped here within the Boxing Source Network. So we're going to be going through all of that here in this particular report. But big ups for everyone that's going to be tuning in here live, watching the replay, all that type of stuff. Hit the support button, as they say, the like button, the support button, if you can here. Whether it's through YouTube, Rumble, or through Facebook. You can also support the Boxing Source through super chats, or just hitting the Cash App there. Of course, you got like hashtag the Boxing Source or whatever it is. So I'm gonna go ahead and just run the ad and all that type of stuff. So y'all see it on there, man, and everything like that. Also, may have the lines open there. You see the number down there or something like that. So if you have like any thoughts on what's happening over the course of boxing, you'll give us a chime in there through the number or whatever it is. So we might see if we could get you on here from that front. But wanted to see if I could talk about this upcoming card here real quick before going over the main topics here for the evening. So of course, we have the event that's coming up at Wells Fargo Center in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Of course, headlined by Jaron Ennis versus Luis Malima there in the super welterweight division. So over to check the card there is the card. You see it right there, Wells Fargo Center. And it is promoted by Matchroom Boxing. It says registered matchmaker is Kevin Rooney Jr. there. So, there you go. So that being said, you got it there headline as Jerron Boots Ennis versus Luis Malima. Apparently, that will be for the WBA interim title. Okay. Once again, this is going to be for the WBA interim title, which could be the thing there as far as like how they're going to set up the winner to face the world champion there of sorts, right? So that's what it's looking like. That'll be for the interim title, because we know that the recently elevated champion is Abbas Barao, right? So, with that being said, Abbas Barao getting to be the 154-pound champion there. As we gotta, I'm gonna see if I can share it here because that's what it was saying there in reference to WBA, right? So I'm gonna share that. There it is. Should be there on the screen. Ennis versus Lima there at the Wells Fargo Center for the WBA Super Welterweight Interim Championship. As I mentioned, with having Abbas Barao winning at the time the interim title, right? When he won that in Orlando, and then he was eventually elevated to full champion. As we know that the former WBA champion there, Terrence Crawford, was able to acquire the undisputed super middleweight championship. Okay, so Abbas Barao is there as now the WBA champion, and now the winner of this upcoming bout between Geronimo Dos Santos and Luis Lima is for the WBA Super Welterweight Interim Championship. So there you go. All right. Now the thing about it is that with this being on BoxRec, uh, some of y'all know how the game goes. BoxRec, they do not, repeat, do not and have not put up anything in reference to the World Boxing Association, given their affiliation to outside entities. Okay, so that's why you see Jerron Ennis versus Luis Maliba, and there is no world title tied to that particular bout on BoxRec. All right, quick fact there. Now you see that it says Alexis Barrera versus Guido Vianello for the WBC Continental Americas heavyweight title. For some time, they had Khalil Cole there versus Jesse Hart in the super middleweight division or light heavyweight division of sorts there as the co-feature bout. But, well, I mean, as the game goes, sometimes with fighters either having injuries or not being available to be out there for about, then hey, there it is. So now you're going to have Alexis Barrera there, undefeated against Guido Vianello for the WBC Continental Americas heavyweight title. You got Tamir Smalls versus Jose Ramon Vasquez, or Jose Ramon, in the welterweight division. I mentioned this fight multiple times. When it comes to this fight, this is Jose Ramon's first bout since he got the win over Jalil Hackett there in the welterweight division last year. And as a result, they're supposed to have the rematch, what it was for the March 15th of this year, but you had Jalil Hackett suffer an injury, got scratched from that bout. We didn't see him back until September at 154. And we all know what's going down at 154 when it comes to Jalil Hackett. But now you got Jose Ramon going up against this undefeated fighter here in Tamir Smalls in the welterweight division. You got Giorgio Visioli. Oh man, I almost butchered that. Right there. Giorgio Visioli versus James Wilkins in the super featherweight division. Zakeem Moses there against Antonio Duntonell Jr. There in the super featherweight division. Zakeem Moses had his pro debut in the Wells Fargo Center last year. And so this is his fifth pro bout. You're going to have Justin Palmieri against Naheem Parker. Naheem Parker was a former opponent of Derek Scooter Davis here, what was that, earlier this year. So now you got him going up against Justin Palmieri, and Harley Medeiros is there against TBA. So there you go. That is your card there for October 11th. All right. So that's what you got. As I mentioned there, they don't have Khalil Cole versus Jesse Hart on that list there. I think, there was something that happened with Khalil Cole. So he has that particular bout has been scratched from the card. Shout out to Brother Joe here in the building. Salute to you. I might talk about some news here later on down the line, but I might just save all the details for the boxingsource.net. So we'll see if we kind of go into that here in this particular episode of the Boxing Source Midweek Report. But I did, as I say, do a quick rundown of the fight card that is at the Wells Fargo Center. Yes, it will be live on DAZN, folks. There for October 11th, right? All right. So that being said, that now I wanted to, kind of like go into, what's happening here in the boxing scene. Of course, talk about San Antonio, Texas. They got, the event coming up there in San Antonio, Texas, right? When it comes to, Brother Joe, we ain't gonna get too much into that there real quick. But wanted to talk about the thing there with San Antonio, Texas, right? Of course, he had a press conference earlier today that involved the WBC interim champion at 140 pounds in Isaac Pitbull Cruz, and he will be facing the current WBA super featherweight champion Lamont Roach Jr. Yes, that will take place at the Frostbank Center in San Antonio, Texas on December 6th. Okay. You have there in Isaac Pitbull Cruz, of course, former WBA champion at super lightweight, getting that win over Rolando Rolly Romero. But in the first defense, losing by decision to Jose Raul Valenzuela on August 3rd of last year there in Los Angeles. But he's been able to get back on the scene. In February 1st, had his win over Angel Fierro in Las Vegas, and then on July 19th, he was supposed to have a rematch there with Angel Fierro, but didn't necessarily work out that way. Angel Fierro, man, yeah, there was no way. It was like absolutely no way that he was going to be making 140 pounds for that fight. So he ended up getting scratched out for that bout. You know what I'm saying? So, we had the replacement opponent there, in a gear ready for Isaac Cruz. And I mean, Cruz won that, bout by decision, right? And it was for the WBC interim title. Okay, so now he makes that defense of the WBC interim title against Lamont Roach Jr. Yes, Lamont Roach Jr. is the WBA super featherweight champion, has held it, since his win over Hector Luis Garcia, made the defense of that title there against Furigo McCory in Washington, D.C., right? And then after that, he fought Tank Davis at the Barclays Center on March 1st. Yes, it was a draw as a result. Many people felt like he won that fight. Many people thought that there would be an immediate rematch. We all know that Tank Davis is going to be facing Jake Paul on Friday, November 14th. So, with that being said, that opened Lamont Roach Jr. to basically face anybody. But not just that, it was that, with him being the WBA super featherweight champion, there was an interim champion, but that interim champion ended up losing, right? So, you have a new interim champion, and the whole thing with the mandatory just, yeah, it is, so there's that, right? So that opens up, Lamont Roach Jr. to face Isaac Cruz, and it's going to be a very good bout there. My brother Joe here says that they had no matchups made for the prelims at this time for December 6th. Yeah, I don't think that they're going to have that there for a while. We might not be able to see that until mid to late November. Okay, as an example, right? For the fight card that they have on October 25th, that's in Las Vegas. There, of course, is headlined by Sebastian Fedor versus Keith Thurman for the WBC Super Welterweight Championship. They recently made an announcement for Frank Martin. They're going up against Francis Barthélemy. That's going to be part of their prelims, right? So, with that being said, they made that announcement yesterday, right? With Frank Martin there against Francis Barthélemy, and you're going to have two other bouts that's on there as well with Capo Gallegos versus Nike Theron and Luis Nunez versus Hector Sosa. So all of that was announced yesterday, and we're about a couple of weeks away from October 25th. So we're not necessarily going to have, the whole thing as far as like that undercard. Well, not even the undercard for the pay-per-view, but I'm talking about like the prelims for that pay-per-view. They won't necessarily be announced until, yeah, like I said, mid-November, early December or something like. Well, it wouldn't be probably a week before, so you won't see it until then. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, you gotta have an interesting fight here, with Isaac Pitbull Cruz and Lamont Roach Jr. As I, did a quick rundown of both of these fighters there, with Isaac Cruz being 28 3-1 with 18 wins by way of knockout, and Lamont Roach Jr. being 25 1-2 with 10 wins by way of knockout there. So we got, it's going to be an interesting battle. Yeah, I had a brief, article that was on the boxingsource.net before they even had this whole thing with the press conference. So they kind of gave you a little bit of a preview of this particular fight. Now, brother Joe here says that, or shout out to Tim Taylor actually here. He says, and you can't see Lamont Roach getting a decision in Texas. Even Miguel Cotto rejected the ever fighting in Texas. And so we'll see how that goes there. This one is I would say a rollout of sorts for Isaac Pitbull Cruz headlining a bout and it being on pay per view. So that's gonna be some, at least a good little, minimum that they would get for each of these fighters for this upcoming fight, right? Of course, as I said, Isaac Cruz there having his wins that he's had this year, right? 2 fights this year already. It's been a fan favorite, ever since being on the spotlight against Tank Davis some time back, right? So we've had bouts against Yuriorkis Gamboa where he beat up Yuriorkis Gamboa into a into a stoppage. Yeah, man, he just beat that. He beat him up there over at AT&T Stadium, man. That was just crazy right there, right? And then he's had bouts against Rolly Romero, like I said, was able to win that WBA title at 140 pounds, then fell short against Raul Valenzuela, but then had his 2 bouts here this year already against Fierro and against Omar Salcido. So now here you are, you get to see, Isaac Cruz being able to be a headliner, right? And now he's going up against Lamont Roach Jr. Of course, has had a winning streak since his decision loss way, 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 way back there, in the super featherweight division when he had his initial world title shot, right, against Jamel Herring. Fell short against Jamel Herring, was able to build himself back up, eventually get a world title shot against Hector Luis Garcia, got the win there by decision in order to become the WBA champion there at super featherweight. Had his defense, as I mentioned, against Fergal McCrory in DC. Then ended up facing Tank Davis at the Barclays Center this year. So this is going to be, like I said, an interesting matchup of styles. Of course, with Pitbull Cruz being, in your grill almost all the time and everything like that. And then Lamont Roach Jr., as he says, ready to boogie, regardless of, having the skill to box or to mix it in on the inside. You know what I'm saying? He says, Joe says he disagrees in reference to the judges. He said, if Oshaki Foster can outpoint Ray Vargas in San Antonio, then Lamont can get a decision. That goes back to, Oshaki Foster, getting the win over Ray Vargas when Ray Vargas moved up, to face Oshaki Foster. So we'll see how that goes. Mara asks here, any ideas on who will appear on the Cruz Roach undercard? Well, we're hearing some rumors that we could see a unification bout finally in the middleweight division. Finally. Hopefully we get it. But we'll see. We could have the unified champion there in Janabek Alamhala going up against the WBA champion in Erislandy Lara. That's possible. Hopefully it happens, but we'll see. So there it goes with that. All right, so we'll see how that goes on reference for that. It says here, man. It says, I think Cruz versus Roach will be a stinker. The blueprint to beat Cruz has been exposed. Box and Turnham reference the Tank versus Cruz fight and the Rayo Valenzuela versus Cruz fight. And I see Lamont playing it safe and not risking the rematch. And Joe says, what rematch? And it says Tank rematch. And Joe says, here is not going to be a Tank rematch. Say goodbye to that one. Well, if y'all have followed the channel here over the past few months, okay, you had the whole thing going back and forth when it came to a potential rematch, right? Initially, and then you had your conversation that I had with Lamont Roach Sr. at one particular point. And at that time, he was having his doubts on if the rematch was going to take place, particularly on how events were scheduled that would have been around the date that some people thought the rematch would take place. And when he kind of like saw that move and then saw other things going on, he was like, you know what? I don't think it's happening then. And there you go, right? And then we got that announcement: Tank versus Jake Paul. Okay. And now, given what's going on and some of the stuff that's being posted here and there, whatever, it looks like Tank Davis ain't really necessarily up for going for a rematch, man. And I said it on either this show or the Boxing Source podcast. I said, man, don't be surprised if you don't see a rematch between Tank Davis and Lamont Roach Jr. And that doesn't even include the whole thing with the other Jake Paul. Okay, so hey, it is what it is with that. Shout out to L Dub in the building. Salute to you. My guy Joe says, why do you think Lamont is so pissed? Hey man, I don't know, man. Hey, once they get themselves situated and sorted back here in the DC area, I'm gonna see if I could have a conversation there with Lamont Roach Jr. about his upcoming fight here against Isaac Cruz, and the whole thing about the whole fiasco with the rematch and all that type of stuff. Because I've been able to talk with Lamont Roach Sr. on multiple occasions, but it's been a while since you've actually seen me have a conversation with Lamont Roach Jr. You know what I'm saying? Uh, he says, "I'll take what Take says serious. He be fickle and emotional in the moment." I mean, it is what it is at this point because hey, you actually heard what he was talking about even before the Lamont Roach Jr. fight, as far as like being closer to retirement. And now, given his upcoming out here against Jake Paul, if he gets a good amount of money for that fight, don't be surprised. I'm gonna just say that, man. Yeah, here's a good one. Shout out to L Dub Boxing. I'm gonna see here, man. Ooh, I gotta figure out how I'm gonna do that because I wanted to get somebody involved to do that. I want to get somebody involved to actually go with this question, right? All right. I got the chance to ask Team Russell about the possibility of Gary Antonio Russell fighting Ramon Cardenas on the Pitbull versus Roach undercard. Yeah, Cardenas is from San Antonio. Yeah. So that was one of the other fights that also was kind of like rumored to take place within this particular card is Ramon Cardenas versus Gary Antonio Russell. And that one would be a really, really good matchup there to take place on December 6th because you got Gary Antonio Russell. I mean, he was able to get back in the mix. He was on a pro box card earlier this year, and we all know about with Ramon Cardenas, he was able to have his bout against Naoya Inoue in May of this year over in Las Vegas. Was able to score a knockdown there. Had a good first few rounds in that bout before eventually losing by stoppage on that one. But we have to see if he will be able to get back in the mix here with a fight against Gary Antonio Russell. As of right now, here with the latest rankings in the WBA, you have Ramon Cardenas at number 2. You have Gary Antonio Russell there at number 5. So that would be a very good bout to, I don't know, be like some type of eliminator bout, or if the WBA wants to, you know what, I ain't even going to say it with the WBA. We already know what they're going to be doing here for October 11th. So I ain't even going to get into the whole joint with that. You know what I'm saying? Shout out my guy Cap Quest here in the building. He says he will retire but be back after some of these guys build up enough profile. Kind of represents St. Davis. All right. Y'all see me have a couple of questions here for Tank, or one question there in the press conference that was in New York City. You've seen me ask a couple of questions, and the thing for what was it, the DC press conference when you had Tank versus Rhodes. Um, yeah, I think he will retire, but as far as like returning for guys building up enough profile, I don't know about all that. Um, it would have to take something where it would be very, very lucrative for him to return to the ring if he ends up retiring, right? It would have to be something very lucrative. There's nothing that says, like, hey, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to come back and then I'm going to face these guys and do this and do that. Like, all of that is, it's more about prize fighting. In the prize is money. You know what I'm saying? Once they made that decision to have him be a pay per view guy, that pretty much did it. You know what I mean? So as long as he's able to get that money, as long as people are able to buy the tickets to see him fight in the arenas, as long as people are able to purchase the pay per views, that is the route that they go. When it's more about popularity than the whole thing as far as like world titles is concerned. Some people, go for the title. Some people go for the money. That's how it is in boxing. You know what I mean? So that's what you have with that. All right. But the thing with that San Antonio card, man, I'm telling you, man, December 6th, if they end up having that as a pay-per-view, say that would be like at least 3 fights on the pay-per-view, right? You would have Isaac Cruz versus Lamont Roach Jr. You would have Janibek Alamhala versus Erislandy Lara, and then you could have Ramon Cardenas versus Gary Antonio Russell. That's not a bad card at all for San Antonio, man. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I like that card for San Antonio. I don't see why not. You know what I mean? Um, but maybe they'll have one more fight out there. They could have someone that could be a good action fighter of sorts that could round out the pay per view card. So you would have those 4 fights, and then outside of that, you would have 3 more fights that would be on the prelim card. As I mentioned there with the October 25th card, they recently announced that. You know what I mean? So what does you have with that? Let me see if I could go ahead and share that actually, because we just recently, had the announcement there. Of course, Frank Martin returning to the ring after like a whole year, basically, or more than a year of being out of the ring, right? So he's going to be facing Rancis Barthélemy, of course, 2 division world champion there, but not necessarily a champion in the super lightweight division, which he's currently competed in, right? So you got that as the whole thing there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share the screen here real quick. And yes, I did see the question there. Oh yeah. I see you, L Dub. Yeah, Mark McShire versus Michael McNeese. I see that. Yeah, that would be a good one also. So that could be the 4 fights right there for San Antonio, because what is it that McShire Magnesi is could be. Oh, it said eliminator. I thought it was going to be like another interim title fight there also, but we'll see how that goes, right? But real quick, like I said, with the October 25th card, you got the 4 fights that are going to be on pay per view there, but then also you got Frank Martin versus Rancis Barthélemy. That's going to headline the WB, the PBC on Prime Video telecast, right? Now you also have there as Kaipo Gallegos facing Nike Theron and Luis Nunez taking on Hector Sosa. So I mean, you see there your quick preview of these fights that are going on. Got the records of the fighters and everything like that, and their comments and stuff. So you might have more on that here later on down the line. You'll just check with the boxing source and stuff like that. For any updates on that. So, I mean, that kind of like gives you a brief preview of what's going on with those 3 fights that's going to be on for October 25th there before the pay-per-view telecast headlined by Sebastian Fedora versus Keith Thurman there. So not a bad card at all, but hey. So here we go. So, talk about the thing there with of course, Isaac Cruz versus Lamont Roach Jr. Like I said, December 6th, if they, have the 4 fights that I mentioned, that would not be a bad card at all there for the pay-per-view. All right. Oh man, we have this thing here for uh Golovkin first ballot, and CapQuest is put in his thoughts on it. All right, so let's go for it, because that is like the other main topic here, right? Is that you recently had the members of, well, certain members of media or whatever it is that are able to vote on the ballot for the 2026 class, right? Um, Now, for me, I'm like, the ballot has up to 42 people, 42 fighters on the ballot. 42. Okay. And thing about it is, it's like, on the ballot, it says you may vote for up to 5 boxers. You're not required to vote for 5, but you may not vote for more than 5, and 3 fighters will be elected. All right. So let me share this here right quick, because this is like something I posted on the website, where I pretty much like give a brief bio or brief breakdown of every fighter that is on the ballot for this 2026 class. So now, again, those that are able to vote, they could vote for up to 5 fighters. Can't vote for more than 5. And out of that class, or that the ballot that has 42, 3 of the top vote getters will be elected. 3. Okay. So we know about, people that are on, that have been on, and all types of stuff here over the previous years. We've had actually a conversation on yesterday on the Real Boxing with Coach Ronnie Shields' show, along with the co-host there, Brother Joseph Aaron of Warwick Boxing. And we mentioned some of the fighters that were named on the list. Okay. Now, as you see there on the screen, we have like some of the brief bios on there. You have someone like, Arthur Abraham, had over 10 defenses of the IBF middleweight title, and what is it, 2-time WBO super middleweight champion. You go down, you have something like Nigel Benn getting 2 divisions, winning titles in 2 divisions. You got like Lushan Butte there, that's been on the ballot. You got Joel Casamayor that's on the ballot. Let's see who else. Steve Collins on the ballot, right? And he's interesting because he is not only a 2 division champion, but he also holds 2 wins over Chris Eubank, who is also on the ballot, has been a 2 division champion, and defended the WBO super middleweight title 12 times, but lost to Steve Collins twice. Okay, that's when the reign ended. You have Vernon the Viper Force that's on there, who we kind of like mentioned on the show yesterday. You got Acelino Popo Freitas on the ballot. You got Mikey Garcia that's on the ballot. Now, some of these I might edit because it says like 4 division champion and stuff like that, but I want to show like what the divisions are that they were able to win titles on. Okay, you got Gennady Golovkin on there. As mentioned, 2-time unified champion at middleweight, defended the WBA middleweight title 17 times with a question mark, and I'm gonna talk about that here in a moment. But just going down more on the list, Genaro Hernandez has been on the ballot multiple times. You got like someone like a Chris John that was able to defend the WBA featherweight title 16 times. Mikael Kessler is a very interesting one. Why? Because 46-3, 35 KOs. Of those 3 losses that he had, all 3 were to Hall of Fame fighters, right? Joe Calzaghe, very, very good bout. If you haven't seen that bout, very good bout. I would say it was fairly close up until the championship rounds, where Calzaghe kind of, separated himself on that one. So that's 1. 2 was against Andre Ward in the Super 6. 3rd was against Carl Froch. What was it, in front of 80,000 fans or whatever it is? But that was the rematch. That wasn't the first bout. That was the rematch. In the first bout, Mikael Kessler won. And the thing about it is, Carl Froch is a Hall of Famer. So you got Miguel Kessler that beat Carl Froch before Carl Froch beat Miguel Kessler. But yet, we'll see. All right. But going down further down the list, you got fighters that won the, what is it, like Henry Maskey. You got that has like defended the IBF light heavyweight title 10 times. Darius Migozewski is another one. Lineal light heavyweight champion, defended the WBO title 23 times. 23. That's right, 23 times. Crazy, right? You got also like Savanaki that retired undefeated. They're defending the IBF title 21 times. You got Sean Porter that's been on the Hall of Fame ballot before. You got Antonio Tarver, of course, multi-time light heavyweight champion, was 2-1 against Roy Jones Jr. And of course, you had the close bout for the first one. You got no excuses tonight, Roy, in the second one, and then the third one in Tampa, Florida, where he was close to stopping Roy Jones again in that one. I was there in attendance for that fight. You got Meldrick Taylor on there. You got Fernando Vargas on there. Israel Vasquez, Wilfredo Vasquez. You got Pung Saklek Wanjunkum there that had a 55-fight win streak and an overall record of 91-5-2. So that shows you like all of the fighters there that are on the ballot. Once again, that's 42 total fighters on the ballot. And out of those 42, they say that 3 will get in. Okay. Now, this goes to the question that I had there on this in reference to level of popularity or whatever it is, or merit. Okay. And a lot of people bring up Gennady Golovkin as the fighter that kind of like has the, I guess, the name of sorts in this particular ballot, with him being a first entry. And this goes to the question that Mar asked here. Do you think Golovkin is a first ballot Hall of Famer? CatQuest says no. And I say no. And I've said this earlier. I've said no. And the thing about it is like, here's the thing, man. Here's the thing on it, right? He has been a unified champion. Okay. He has been a unified champion on multiple occasions. But the one is the level of competition. Okay. 2, it's the times that he was able to face like higher competition. Either it was like a close fight, or he ended up falling short. A lot of people bring up that first encounter with Santos Alvarez Barragan. The result is a draw. A draw is a draw. We've had multiple controversial results over the history in boxing. Okay. That is, of course, one of them. But he also had 2 other fights with Canelo Alvarez. Now, a lot of people just point to the rematch because the one that was the third one was in the super middleweight division. And that was like after, Golovkin was pretty much in the back end. So a lot of people point to the second fight. And in the second fight, we saw Canelo beat Gennady Golovkin. And we seen it happen. Okay. Outside of that, you've had, other encounters there for Gennady Golovkin. And then for me, with Golovkin too, is I feel like he could have had an opportunity to become the undisputed middleweight champion of the world, but didn't. Not sure why, but that's the thing. CatQuest says, what's his biggest win? A debatable one against Daniel Jacobs. Possibly. He battled Daniel Jacobs. He had an early knockdown in that fight. Daniel Jacobs was very competitive in that one. I felt like he got the advantage over Golovkin, outpointing him for a majority of that fight. But it ended up being a win for Gennady Golovkin, which led to the first bout against Canelo Alvarez. Right. So there, outside of that, you got bouts against Kell Brook, Dominic Wade, David Lemieux in a unification bout. Martin Murray, maybe a Martin Murray. I don't know. Daniel Gill. Um, and the thing about it is like a lot of people talk about the number of defenses that Gennady Golovkin had there in the middleweight division. To me, that was not that much separate than what Bernard Hopkins had with his record number of title defenses. You know what I mean? Because remember, they said like Golovkin was right around the verge of breaking that record when he took on Canelo Alvarez there, but it just ended up being a draw, right? But then here's the other thing too, right? Is that with Golovkin, he was able to acquire the like a secondary middleweight title, as they say. But hey, people sometimes recognize the IBO, right? So after that, he had like a version of the WBA title. Okay. And when he did get that WBA title, it was more of like what? He was the interim champion at the time. I have to, go ahead and confirm that or type of source, right? So that's what I'm gonna, go ahead and try and do, right? So when you got him acquiring the WBA title of sorts, right? There was also a regular champion, right? And then when that fighter became the super champion, they elevated Golovkin to regular status, right? So once he had that regular championship, he was defending that WBA title multiple times until they elevated him to super champion. So it's like that's the thing about it. And did he have the opportunity to move up and face Ward? Yes, he did. Yes, he did. But he didn't. He didn't go ahead and do that. Now, as I said, with the whole thing with the WBA, right? Here's the thing. You have as I said, you have multiple titles there within the WBA. Just going there real quick. You have multiple titles there within the WBA. You can have a super champion. You can have a regular champion. You can have an interim champion. You can have a gold champion. You can have a I don't know. Well, they don't do intercontinental champions, but Continental Americas. Yeah, Continental Americas champion there within the WBA. But let's just focus on the whole thing with a super champion, regular champion, interim champion. Okay. Now, if I'm not mistaken, it was let's see. I'm gonna go into this here real quick because I wanna see who the fighter was that ended up being the WBA super champion. If I'm not mistaken, that was Felix Sturm, right? Wasn't it Felix Sturm that was the WBA champion when Golovkin was the interim champ, right? So if that was the case, yep, that is correct. 2007, like he was the WBA middleweight champion. And with him having multiple defenses of that title, he was able to become the super champion in 2010, right? And Golovkin was like a champion at what, 20, pretty much 2010, right? So, hey, I'll go ahead and share that real quick, right? We got this thing here. So if y'all are able to see this on the screen, right? This is Felix Sturm's, resume here. And even like below this here, where you got like this Marcelino Masso for the WBA middleweight title. Then he was able to win it back after losing to Javier Castillejo in a rematch, right? Then he was able to defend it multiple times before he was elevated to super champion status, right? When that happened, you had Gennady Golovkin shown here interim champion at the bottom right hand corner, if you're able to see it, and then was able to be the WBA regular champion in 2010, December of 2010. So when he was the regular champion in 2010, Felix Sturm was the super champion. And then Felix Sturm ended up defending those super championships, right? Up until his loss to Daniel Gill in a unification bout in 2012. So here's my thing. Do those WBA regular championships count as title defenses? Because if they do, then you're going to have to use that for other fighters that held the WBA regular championship. And in some cases, some people don't count that when you have a WBA super champion. That's all I'm going to say on that, right? That's one. And then two, y'all know how the game goes in boxing talk and stuff like that, right? When you have a fighter that's either a mandatory challenger, an interim champion, or a regular champion, and you have a world champion that's out there, and the interim champion, mandatory, whatever it is going after that world champion, and that champion eventually doesn't face him, ends up moving up or going elsewhere, and then that interim champ or the mandatory challenger ends up becoming the champion. What is the term that they come up with for that person that ends up being elevated to world champion? Don't they necessarily call them an email champion? So if that's the case, would the same thing be said about Gennady Golovkin when it comes to the WBA title? I don't know. Now, the other thing here with Golovkin, right? And this kind of like goes into the whole thing with popularity contests. When you have someone that's kind of being really favorable for a number of people within the media, they're going to give them a little bit of extra oomph behind the vote. So that's why, even though Brother Marr asked the question, do I think he's a first ballot? No, I don't. Do I think he's going to get in as a first ballot? Most likely, yes. He shouldn't, but most likely, yes. And the reason why I say no is because a number of accolades that people bring up when it comes to Gennady Golovkin, you still have those same accolades from other fighters that have been on the ballot and haven't been able to get in. So how is it that he's able to be different than these other guys that are on the ballot? Like a Darius Michaelzewski, right? Like a Sven Oki, right? Like a Mikhail Kessler. I just named three fighters that are on the ballot of 42 that I would say that should be able to get in over Gennady Golovkin. And you know what's crazy? I didn't even mention the three fighters that I would have picked over Gennady Golovkin. I said this on Saturday on the Brunch Boxing Show. I picked three fighters on the list that I would put over Gennady Golovkin in this. Okay? It was Forrest, Mikey Garcia, and Antonio Tarver. Okay? Vernon Forrest defeated Sugar Shane Mosley, and Sugar Shane Mosley was pretty much the clear-cut number one pound-for-pound fighter in the sport at the time, and handed him his first loss of his professional career. Vernon Forrest is lineal champion there at welterweight, got the win in the rematch. Yes, he did fall short to Ricardo Mayorga, but he was able to become super welterweight champion twice. So I would at least have something like that with Vernon Forrest showing that, hey, he was clear cut the number one fighter in that particular division, defeating Shane Mosley, and could be considered the clear cut, like he should have been there as like pound for pound number one, getting a win over Shane Mosley twice. You know what I mean? So I would have put in a vote for Vernon Forrest. I would have put in a vote for Antonio Tarver, of course, being able to defeat Roy Jones twice, being able to become the what is it, like cruiserweight champion and like a version of a heavyweight title or something like that. But I would have no, it's an IBO cruiserweight champion. So you got to have him at least there in consideration. And I'm not even mentioning a lot of the other fighters that are on this list. Again, it's 42 people on the ballot, 42 fighters on the ballot. And you can only vote for up to 5 and only 3 get in. You know what I mean? So it's absolutely it makes for a real interesting conversation. But I was mentioning earlier with one of the candidates there in Mikhail Kessler, right? You have a Mikhail Kessler that has 3 losses to his record, and all of them to Hall of Famers, all of them, and he beat one of them before losing to that guy in the rematch. He says, Jaime Alvarado, right? He asked if Diego Chico Corrales is in the Boxing Hall of Fame. All right. Let me see here if I could get that list here. So I'm gonna pull up that list also. Let me see if I could do that here real quick. If I could get the International Boxing Hall of Fame list here, because like if you got someone like Diego Corrales, I don't know. You know what I'm saying? So let's see if we could get this on here real quick, because I'm going to pull up the thing there for the Boxing Hall of Fame. Hold on just a moment. Just give me a quick moment and I'll pull up the modern list here real quick. All right, here we go. We should have the modern list here, right? So everything is in alphabetical order. You see the C's there on the left side. Now, you do have Diego Chico Corrales in the Hall of Fame. His induction was 2024. So you had this year's class, of course, that was what? Headlined by Emmanuel Dapijan Pacquiao. And the year before that, you have Diego Chico Corrales there on there. And you see there with his brief bio, starting boxer at the age of 8, registered a 105-12 amateur record. What was it? He won the IBF super featherweight title, defended it 3 times. Before losing to WBC champion Floyd Mayweather Jr. He lost to Joel Casamayor, and then he lost to Joel Casamayor in the first bout, then won in the split decision in the second bout. And you see there with this bout with Jose Luis Castillo, the first one, fight of the year. Okay. Professional record there at 40-5 with 33 wins by way of knockout. Okay, so there you go. Diego Chico Corrales is in the Hall of Fame. Okay. Now, I'm gonna stop sharing there real quick, and I'm gonna just focus on this. All right. So, shout out Jaime Alvarado. There's your answer there. Diego Chico Corrales is in the Hall of Fame. He is a 2024 inductee. Okay. You have someone like Timothy Bradley in the Hall of Fame, recent inductee. Okay. And yes, we have a lot of these conversations where you have fighters that are in the Hall of Fame that y'all are like, Hall of Fame? And it kind of goes to what I was asking. Is it a popularity contest? Because when I think Hall of Fame, not just for boxing, but for sports, I'm thinking of fighters or athletes that stood out above all others within the era that they, were able to either play in or fight in. Clear cut number one, like best in the sport, all that type of stuff. And there was like no doubts, none. And that they went up against like the best of the best, or see if they could go up against the best of the best if it's boxing. Okay. If not, or they didn't show like at times where they could win like high profile matchups or anything like that, then I don't necessarily consider them as a Hall of Famer. Like I don't, you know. And with that being said, we've had like controversial picks over the years, and you're going to have one here coming up. I'm telling y'all, Gennady Golovkin is going to end up being a Hall of Famer in the first year of eligibility due to a number of the people within the media going to pick him. Yes, I know about one of them that posted on social media their vote for Gennady Golovkin. You're going to have a lot of folks within that group that are going to pick Gennady Golovkin, and that's going to be enough for him to get in. To me, he's not a first ballot Hall of Famer. He shouldn't be eligible. I wouldn't necessarily say eligible. He shouldn't be able to get in over some of the fighters that are already on the list and that have been on the list. But he's going to get in. Shouldn't, but he's going to get in, right? Um, I mentioned those who I would have picked or who I probably would have voted for. Actually, three, maybe up to five, because I would definitely include Kessler. I would include Kessler because again, he beat a fighter that's in the Hall of Fame. So you mean to tell me that you have the impressive record that you have, you defeated a fighter that is in the Hall of Fame before that fighter beats you, and all pretty much like all of the fights that you lost were pretty much close losses, and yet I'm in the Hall of Fame. Hey, I don't know. So, man, I don't know, man. I might have to just put in a follow up article there after putting that post in of all of the 42 fighters that are on that list, and I'm gonna show like why I would pick certain fighters that should be in and why some that are on the list are not or shouldn't be in. At least not at this time. Nah, won't do it. Okay. Now, with that being said, we also had something in reference to um, whether it was Saturday in another show, shout out to Brunch Boxing, and on the previous show here yesterday on Real Boxing with Ronnie Shields, right? Because one, we need to get Ronnie Shields in the Hall of Fame. That's number one. Number two, we have of those 42 fighters, right? We have some fighters that some of y'all may know that are not on the ballot. I'll mention one of them. Let's go back to what Jaime Alvarado said. Chico Corrales in the Hall of Fame. Yes, Diego Chico Corrales is in the Hall of Fame. What is one of those fights that Chico Corrales is known for having? His bout against Jose Luis Castillo. And Jose Luis Castillo is not in the ballot for the International Boxing Hall of Fame. He at least should be on the ballot. He at least should be on the ballot. Now, I'll give you another one. I'll give you another fighter that not only should be on the ballot, but I would say should be in the Hall of Fame. Okay. Now, I'll talk about popularity contests, favoritisms, and all that. Yeah, I've said this many times over. Sometimes as a media member, you would have favoritism towards some fighters, or at least like give a little boost towards some fighters, right? Here's one fighter that I, kind of like have favoritism towards over the course of his career. Okay, was a fan of before I got into this media game. Okay, and that fighter's name is Zabdil Judah, Super Zab Judah. That's right, world champion at 140 pounds, moved up to 147 pounds, became the undisputed welterweight champion at 147 pounds, made a defense of those undisputed championships, won, and then, had his bout against Carlos Baldomir, and we all know what happened there. And after that, faced Floyd Mayweather Jr. But then, even with all of that, he was still able to win the super lightweight championship after that. So he's been a two-time super lightweight champion, undisputed welterweight champion, and has been competitive in a number of fights, even after though that loss to Floyd Mayweather Jr., including a bout against Danny Garcia. Right? So yeah. Um, you know what? I hate this. I hate this man. See, you played on this. You orchestrated this. You shout out the topic, but you were probably watching for the past 5 or 10 minutes, and you had this. You were waiting to post this. Man, I hate you for this, man. Teofimo Lopez, future Hall of Famer, man. I can't believe you did that, man. I can't believe you did. Come on, man. Listen, all right, let me get back to this, man. So Zab Judah not only should be on the ballot, but he should be a Hall of Famer. Topic, man. Oh my God, bro. Come on, man. Oh my God. Oh. But yeah, those are two fighters that should be at least under consideration. Jose Luis Castillo, who also has a controversial lawsuit Floyd Mayweather Jr. that some people that are voting here probably say beat Floyd Mayweather. But yet he's not on the okay. So yeah, so Jose Luis Castillo and Zab Judah should be on the ballot. Okay, so there's that, right? So kind of like gave you the rundown there of the fighters that are currently on the ballot. I don't know if I have the thing as far as like that article that's on the boxingsource.net. I don't know if it's open for comments or anything like that. But if it is, y'all could share your thoughts as far as like who on that list of 42 fighters. Once again, 42 fighters. Who on that list would you say should be in the Hall of Fame for this class? I'll just put it that way. For this particular class, who do you think should be in the 2026 class? Okay. And again, there's going to be some type of little thing there when it comes to popularity and that type of stuff when you have these votes. So that's why I said that Gennady Golovkin is likely going to be inducted in the 2026 class, even though he shouldn't be he shouldn't be a first ballot Hall of Famer. Number two, he shouldn't be a Hall of Famer over a number of fighters that have been on the ballot that probably have actually a better resume than he does. So there it is. Now I know that some people are saying like Gennady Golovkin is not a Hall of Famer. I'm not saying that he's not a Hall of Famer. What I'm saying is she shouldn't be a first ballot Hall of Famer. Just real quick here. Going back to this as I kind of like answered this earlier. What in your opinion makes a fighter a Hall of Famer? Okay, here we go. Like I said, I kind of view it as how it is in other sports, right? One, you're like a clear cut top fighter, not just within your division, but within like that era. Okay. And that's part of it. The other part is who you beat and who you lost to. That's another one. Who you beat, who you lost to. And the other thing I would say is what were you able to do later on in your career? That would be another one. Okay. So with that being said, I'm like, well, if you have fighters that have had multiple world title defenses, that surpassed like 19 or 20, and they're not in the Hall of Fame. What does that tell you? If you have fighters that have been able to become unified or two-time unified champions and they aren't able to get in, but yet someone is most likely going to get in within their first year of eligibility, you know, I don't know. Question here says fighters get compensated for being inducted. Listen, I'm not part of the International Boxing Hall of Fame committee. You might have to, send an email to the International Boxing Hall of Fame in order to see if they'll be able to give you that answer. But I don't know. I mean, they might have it to where they pay for the flights and the lodging and that type of stuff. But outside of that, I don't know. So that guy, yeah, man, like Zab should definitely be in. Yeah, I mean, why not? I mean, yeah, he had that, the hiccup there, with in the super lightweight division, there with Coach Suzu, right? But then after that, he was able to get back in the mix, have the first fight that he had against Corey Spinks, ended up falling short, went and had another fight, then had the rematch in Corey Spinks and ended up stopping Corey Spinks to become undisputed champion. And as I mentioned, was able to make one defense of that title before his fight against Baltimore, right? And then after that, the thing there with Floyd Mayweather Jr., which I felt like that fight should have happened at 140 or at least earlier 147 because there wasn't anybody that could be their matchup speed for speed with Floyd Mayweather as Zab Judah, and you kind of like seen that early in the fight. You know what I mean? But you ended up falling short in that, but still was able to have a instance where he was able to win a super lightweight title again and beat an undefeated fighter in the process in an eliminator before winning the world title, and then was able to compete against the likes of a Danny Garcia, Paulie Malignaggi. After that, I'm still kind of bothered by that. Like Paulie Malignaggi has a win over Zab Judah, like man. But yeah, still though, like you gotta at least have him under consideration. He should be on the ballot, and he should be in. Now the other thing too is right, and this goes back to Topic's question and making a fighter a Hall of Famer. And that's why I mentioned being almost like a clear cut number one fighter within your division, or kind of like being a guy that you would say is, yeah, he's the best of the division, and he kind of like proved that against like every fighter that was out there and had like high profile fights to a certain extent. And then the other thing is like, how did they do in those whole high profile fights? And in some cases, you have fighters that are in the Hall of Fame that didn't necessarily do well in high profile fights, but they're in because of, moments, you know what I mean? Or fights that they've had, like classic fights, fight of the year. They've been in fight of the years multiple times. Then that puts them in the Hall of Fame. Shout out to Boxing Wiz. He says Boss Lomachenko is in the Hall of Fame, and Errol Spence is in the Hall of Fame. Okay, Boss Lomachenko has been a topic of controversy in the past as far as like his validity in the Hall of Fame. Multi-division world champion, unified in the lightweight division, fell short to become undisputed champion against Evan Haney. Has wins over the likes of like Gary Russell Jr. And Guillermo Rigondeaux, among others. What was it against? Jorge Linares in the lightweight division. He was like, they say like he is a clear cut number one guy within the 130-pound division, even though we never unified. Number one at one point at 135 until he lost to Teofimo Lopez, who somebody said is a future Hall of Famer. Yo, that, oh my God, I don't believe it. I don't believe it. But he ended up losing to Teofimo Lopez, and ended up losing to Devin Haney, right? So, and has that early loss in his career to Orlando Salido. What is it, about 20 or so fights professionally for Vasily Lomachenko? And yes, he was able to become, as I said, multi-division world champion, unified in one division, lightweight division. But some people say, like, is it enough for him to be in the Hall of Fame? Like I said, popularity contest. Watch him be a first ballot Hall of Famer. Now, Errol Spence, this is going to be the one. You know what? This is going to be the one, though, right? Because it's a good one to bring up Errol Spence. Because we talk about Gennady Golovkin, right? We got to talk about Errol Spence Jr. Errol Spence Jr. was able to have his career there in the welterweight division, just like Gennady Golovkin had pretty much his career in the middleweight division, right? He was able to defeat Kell Brook by stoppage, stop Kell Brook to become IBF champion, defended those titles there multiple times before unifying against Sean Porter, who is on the ballot, had a win against Danny Garcia, who knows could potentially be on the ballot, stopped Yordenis Ugas, who defeated the 2025 International Boxing Hall of Fame inductee Manny Pacquiao, yet only has the lone loss, at least right now, to Terrence Crawford. So if he ended his career and that was it, it's over, it's done. If he was eligible in next year? I think it's 3 years. Then would he be considered as a Hall of Famer? First ballot? He said, Spence Hall of Fame, no question. Vasily Lomachenko did beat Jermaine Ortiz too, but so did Teofimo Lopez. Come on, man! I can't believe he said Teofimo Lopez future Hall of Famer. I'm still screwed up about that. But yeah, man, Errol Spence Hall of Fame. You would say no question, but will he be first ballot? That's the question. Would Errol Spence Jr. be a first ballot Hall of Famer? Because as I mentioned here earlier, you're going to end up having Gennady Golovkin be a first ballot Hall of Famer. And this is not like, baseball or anything like that, where you kind of like see like for example, Derek Jeter, right? Mariano Rivera, right? You would say no question they're Hall of Famers. The only thing about them was, they didn't get the highest percentage of votes because somebody just said, you know what, let me just not include them in the Hall of Fame this year. Yeah, but here with this in boxing, you kind of like see the work, right? Or you could read what's going on, or given a certain time period, you could actually see these bouts that took place. So with someone like a Gennady Golovkin, and you see the fights that he's had, like you go over, man, I'm gonna all right, y'all. I'm gonna go quickly here and name the fighters that Gennady Golovkin defeated while holding a version of the WBA title. All right, y'all ready? Here we go. Nelson Julio Tapia, Kasim Uma, Lawan Simon, Makoto Fujigami, Gregor Proksa, Gabe Rosado, Nobuhiro Ishida, Matthew Macklin, Curtis Stevens, Osumanu Adama, Daniel Gill, Marco Antonio Rubio, Martin Murray, Willie Monroe Jr., David Lemieux, Dominic Wade, Kell Brook, Daniel Jacobs before his draw against Canelo Alvarez. Now, you go through that list. And as we mentioned, outside of Daniel Jacobs and Marco Rubio, maybe? No, Martin Murray, I guess. Or is it Matthew Macklin? One of those guys. Outside of that, like, what would really stand out in that resume for Gennady Golovkin? Nothing really, right? Compare that to maybe what, like a Bernard Hopkins, who has what, a win over Felix Trinidad, right? During his reign as champion, right? Let's see what else. What else then for Bernard Hopkins there as his reign as a middleweight champion? Oscar De La Hoya. So you got Felix Trinidad, Oscar De La Hoya, at least those two, right? Antoine Eccles, baby, right? Glenn Koff Johnson, who was able to win a championship in the light heavyweight division, right? John David Jackson. And it was funny because when Gennady Golovkin was having his run defending that title, they were saying, "Oh, this is like Bernard Hopkins having his multiple title defenses there in the middleweight division." No, not even close. Not even close. No way. Not even close. So, with that being said, Gennady Golovkin likely going to be in first ballot Hall of Famer. Shouldn't be in first ballot Hall of Famer. That's why I got on that. So, went through all of that. As I mentioned there, man, mixing up Liam's, what, like Liam Smith and how many Liams are there, man? Liam Williams or whatever it is. Like, man, I don't know how many Liams there is in boxing. Shout out to that guy, man. But yeah, that's my whole thing in reference to the Boxing Hall of Fame ballot. And as I mentioned there, I'll see if I have a follow-up article on that. And you'll see what we're going to have here later on down the line. Pretty much doing a winding down this particular edition of the Midweek Report. Shout out to BVO Sports TV checking in here. Salute to you. Check out BVO Sports TV. But yeah, this is our edition of the Midweek Report. As you said, we got the upcoming fight card for October 11th in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, headlined by Jerome Bruce Ennis versus Luis Lima for the WBA Interim Super Welterweight Championships, and that will be live on the Zone there. So y'all go ahead and check that out if you can. As far as like having a podcast for Sunday, not sure if it'll be live on Sunday evening. So we'll see how that goes. Let's see. Oh, just real quick here. Devin Miles Haney, Hall of Famer. We'll see. We'll see. Undisputed lightweight champion, WBC super lightweight champion, going after the WBO welterweight championship in his bout November 22nd against Brian Norman Jr. We shall see if he gets this win to become a 3-division champion, and if that would constitute him to be considered a Hall of Famer. Now, again, I mentioned Vasily Lomachenko being a featherweight, super featherweight, and lightweight champion. And they're going to have him in the Hall of Fame. Devin Haney beat Vasily Lomachenko while holding the undisputed lightweight championship. So, there you go. So, with that being said, that is this edition of the Boxing Source Midweek Report. So, to everyone that's been able to catch live here through your Rumble, through YouTube, Facebook, whatever it is, hit the share button, hit the like button. You see how you could be able to support the Boxing Source here. As I mentioned, we got a number of fights that's coming up here. October 11th, Philadelphia. October 18th, we're going to be in New York City, Barclays Center. Danny Garcia, Daniel Gonzalez. We're supposed to have a live conversation, actually a live interview tomorrow on the channel here with Richard Comey. All right. So we got that scheduled here for tomorrow afternoon on the Boxing Source YouTube channel, right? Richard Comey, and he's going to be facing Nahir Albright on that fight card on October 18th. That's going to be a really interesting bout, especially given Nahir Albright's decision win over Kelvin Davis that was in Norfolk in early June. So looking forward to that bout on that card. All right. And shout out to my guy, Jaime Alvarado. That being said, folks, I'm out. Peace.